Progressive Examiner here with a interview with one of my personal heroes. I have a conversation, special announcement today with the mailman who landed a gyrocopter on the lawn of the Capitol in order to deliver mail to the 535 members of Congress. Doug, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Doug Hughes is going to be doing something pretty extraordinary following his already extraordinary act of civil disobedience. He's going to challenge Debbie Wasserman Schultz for her position in Congress. So this is pretty exciting. Let me ask you, Doug, to start. Do you support Bernie Sanders' political revolution?
Absolutely. I think that Bernie Sanders is the best candidate out there on the issues, and I think that he's shown his integrity by the way he's collecting money, not taking big money, not taking PAC money.
And aside from democratic socialism, his position on the issues, what is it that makes this a political revolution as far as you're concerned?
The revolution is very much in the fact that he is representing the interests of regular Americans first. Everybody else is signed up and having their strings pulled by the corporate masters that have financed their campaigns.
On another issue, would you support, if you're elected to Congress, a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and all related decisions going back in one direction to Buckley v. Vallejo, where the court decided to amend the First Amendment by turning money into a form of speech, and in the other direction to way back to the 19th century when the court decided to start giving corporations the rights of human beings? Would you support a constitutional amendment in Congress to overturn Citizens United and all related decisions?
I think the Supreme Court needs a reality check, but unfortunately, because of the makeup of the Supreme Court, it is necessary to pass a constitutional amendment that clarifies what we mean as far as the status of people versus corporations, okay, and the right of the government to limit money in politics. If we have a constitutional amendment, then the laws that we pass won't be struck down by the court, but one hand washes the other. We need the constitutional amendment and we need the legislation.
All right. So, different topic on the subject of climate change. Would you support mandates to the manufacturers of automobiles, trucks, recreational vehicles to compel them to have as the source of energy in these vehicles something other than fossil fuels, whether it's electric, hydrogen, whatever other non-fossil fuel source of energy might be available? Would you support mandates requiring them to produce vehicles or foreign manufacturers to sell vehicles in the United States on non-fossil fuel lines?
Well, let's say I drive a hybrid. My vehicle gets between 40 and 50 miles per gallon. And we have got to transition to alternate forms of energy that are not going to drive global warming. But you can't do it overnight. Our economy and our whole way of life is currently dependent on energy, and we can't switch over to clean energy overnight. I absolutely support the transition, and we've got to do it as quickly as possible, but we've got to do it without driving this country into a depression.
I'm going to follow up on that. If the choice is to driving the country into a depression versus destroying civilization with the collapse of the environment, wouldn't it make more sense to push these manufacturers into a mandate rather than destroy the natural environment that we need to live on?
The only force we have that can compel the fossil fuel industry to abandon where they are ruining the planet, we've got to have a strong government to do that. Driving a country into collapse means that there's a void that the fossil fuel companies will use to solidify their power, okay? We have got to get away from fossil fuels. The transition cannot create an opportunity for an economic or political collapse that they would capitalize on.
All right. Another subject, taxes. Would you support an increase of the top marginal tax rate on the, say, top 1% of income earners?
Absolutely. When you look at where we are when FDR was able to pass the socialist legislation that he did, and almost all Republicans support, okay, the tax bracket for the top bracket was around 93%. The 20 years after FDR were the best economic years that this country ever had, with high taxes for the very rich. I would support expanding the number of tax brackets and expanding the amount that people pay in the upper brackets. And yes, the businesses have got to pay their fair share. We could lower the tax rate for corporations if all of the corporations were actually paying what they owed.
Is there any issue that Bernie has any position on that you disagree with?
There's nothing that I significantly disagree with. I really respect him for having come right out in speaking for the two-state solution as far as how Israel needs to progress in order to have security in the coming centuries. So I'm absolutely in alignment with Bernie on that, and I like the fact that he hasn't tiptoed around it the way so many politicians have.
You're running up against an establishment Democrat who certainly will be getting a lot of donations from Wall Street and other corporate actors in the United States. What role will campaign finance reform play in your campaign?
It is the dominant issue that drives me personally. It's not the only issue that I'll concern myself with, but we have got to get the money out of politics if we're going to address education, the environment, the school to prison pipeline, almost any issue where money is involved. We won't get progress until we get the money out of politics so that the government reflects the will of the people instead of the people with money.
There's a lot of Bernie supporters that are very unhappy with Debbie Wasserman Schultz's role as chairperson of the Democratic National Committee. And in that position, she's quite powerful. Do you have any other issues in terms of how she's planning the convention or running the DNC? Is there anything that you're going to make a point to emphasize during this campaign?
Well, the Democratic National Committee is broke, while the Republican National Committee is about $16 million plus. Debbie Wasserman Schultz doesn't have the money to finance the convention, the presidential convention next year. So I had heard she's planning on financing it with corporate money, where she's going to sell the best seats in the House to the corporate donors, which she says is virtually the only source of money for the Democratic National Committee to put on any kind of a show for the presidential convention.
Back to the role of money in politics, of course, as I said, she's going to be well funded. Her campaign will be well funded. It's going to be a tough challenge. If somebody were interested in helping you in the form of a super PAC, would you be willing to accept support from a super PAC backing your candidacy?
I don't have anybody with big money backing me up, but I don't have any problem with using the super PAC to end super PACs. My campaign is intended to get the money out of politics. But if the advantage that they have, which is money, if I have to collect money from big sources to have a super PAC to get elected and get this through, I am going to get it through, and then I'm going to turn right around and use what power we have in order to end super PACs and get it so that people are the only source of money in elections.
Well, I appreciate your time, Doug. Is there anything else you'd like to add to our viewers?
Well, I'm not fond of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, but I'm not just running against her. The object isn't to defeat Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it's to get the money out of politics so we can make progress on all the other issues. Once I'm elected, I want to form, and I go blank on the name, a committee in Congress, okay, that would be a bipartisan committee on the subject of reform, getting money out of politics.
A caucus?
A caucus, thank you. That was the word that escaped me. It would be a bipartisan caucus because there are a lot of Republicans, some of them Tea Party Republicans, who happen to agree on the evil role of Wall Street and K Street. Consider that Eric Cantor would be the Speaker of the House if he hadn't gotten primaried out by a Tea Party candidate, the same way that I'm going to primary out Debbie Wasserman Schultz using progressives. If in 2014 Brat wins and 2016 I win, we have proven that every member of the U.S. House is vulnerable in a primary. Look at how the U.S. House of Representatives is gerrymandered. Over 80% of the U.S. House of Representatives seats are a gimme for one party or the other. So suppose in 2018, this committee has agreed on what reform means, and we have a pledge that defines reform. We would submit that to the rest of the House so that people could sign on to the pledge on reform, or they don't. Where they don't, we'll go ahead and take that pledge and we'll recruit reformists to challenge the incumbents in the primary election. In a red district, the Republicans will recruit an honest Republican in order to replace the sold-out Republican. In a blue district, we Democrats would find Democrats to replace the sold-out Democrats. And in the 2018 election, we'll make it a referendum. Nationwide, we'll elect a majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. We have over 217 people elected in 2019. When they sign on, we can require the leadership bring legislation up for a vote. The constitutional amendment you mentioned early has been written, but it won't come up to the floor while the leadership can block it. The laws that we need to get the money out of politics exist in committee, but they won't come out of committee. But if a majority was to walk out of the U.S. House of Representatives and demand that the leadership bring this legislation up, we can do it. And the Senate will pass it when there's 300 million Americans watching this drama. A Democratic president, certainly a Bernie Sanders, would sign that legislation into law. And in 2019, we will get reform, a wall of separation between big money and our government. That's why I'm running for Congress.
Viva la revolution, Doug. Best of luck to you.
Thanks for having me on.